The desert stretched flat and endless beneath a sky the color of dried blood. Somewhere in the haze between dusk and darkness, a convoy of 16 armored vehicles burned in silence, their hulls twisted open like crushed cans. No distress calls had gone out. No survivors waved from the wreckage. Intelligence said it was an ambush, quick, surgical, devastating. But the pilots flying reconnaissance that evening saw something else in their thermal optics, something that didn't match the profile of any known insurgent group. The heat signatures were too precise, the spacing too tactical. Someone had painted those vehicles with laser designators before the first round ever flew. Someone who knew exactly where to hit and when. The problem was that every friendly asset in the sector had been accounted for, every strike logged and verified. Except one. At 0400 hours, a classified after-action report crossed the desk of a three-star general who hadn't slept in 36 hours. It contained 12 words that made him reach for the phone. Unidentified A-10 observed in grid. No flight plan filed. Vanished. The aircraft had appeared on radar for exactly 9 minutes before dropping below the terrain, skimming so low that ground-based systems lost track. What it had done in those 9 minutes, no one could say for certain. But the convoy, a high-value target that intelligence had been tracking for weeks, was gone, obliterated, and whoever flew that warthog hadn't stuck around for congratulations. The briefing room at Kandahar smelled like burnt coffee and old sweat. Major Ellison stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw tight as he addressed the dozen pilots seated in folding chairs. They were tired, most of them, faces lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from flying too many hours over hostile ground. The screen behind him displayed a grainy satellite image. A single A-10 Thunderbolt II, wings heavy with ordnance, frozen mid-flight over barren rock. The timestamp read 0342. Ellison tapped the screen. This bird took out an entire mechanized column last night, alone, no authorization, no comms, just showed up, lit them up, and disappeared. Silence filled the room. Someone coughed. A younger pilot, Kowalski, raised his hand halfway. "Sir, whose bird is that?" Ellison's expression didn't change. "That's what we're trying to figure out." The tail number had been scrubbed from the image, but the airframe was unmistakable, older model, retrofitted, flying lower and meaner than regulations allowed. Whoever piloted it knew the machine inside and out, knew how to hide from satellites and stay off enemy radar. The kind of flying that came from years in the seat, not months. Rumors spread faster than wildfire on a forward operating base. By noon, half the base had heard some version of the story. An A-10 with no call sign. A ghost pilot. Some said it was a black op, something above their clearance. Others whispered it was someone gone rogue, someone with a score to settle. In the maintenance hangar, a crew chief named Vasquez was running diagnostics on a freshly returned warthog when he noticed something odd. The gun barrel was warm, not hot, but warm enough to suggest it had been fired within the last 6 hours. The flight log, however, showed the aircraft grounded for maintenance since the previous afternoon. He stared at the screen, then at the nose of the aircraft, where faint scorch marks traced the edges of the cannon housing. Vasquez had been turning wrenches on A-10s for 11 years. He knew what a gun run looked like. He also knew when someone was trying to cover their tracks. He pulled his phone and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in months. Captain Riyad Khan, intelligence liaison, currently deployed somewhere in the eastern provinces. The call went to voicemail. Vasquez left a message. "Hey, it's me. You remember that pilot you asked about last year? The one who got flagged for aggressive tactics? Yeah, I think she's back." Captain Riyad Khan stood on the tarmac, phone pressed to his ear, replaying Vasquez's message for the third time. Around him, helicopters spun up, their rotors chopping the air into rhythmic thunder. He'd been chasing ghosts for 6 months, ever since a series of unexplained strikes began appearing in classified reports. Targets eliminated with textbook precision. No claims of responsibility. No patterns except one. Every hit involved close air support in situations where no CAS had been requested. The tactics were unmistakable to anyone who'd studied her file. Lieutenant Colonel Myra Castor. Call sign, Revenant. She'd been one of the best A-10 pilots in the Air Force before she disappeared from active rosters 8 months ago. Officially, she'd been reassigned to a training command stateside. Unofficially, she'd vanished the same week her squadron was decimated in a coordinated surface-to-air missile attack. 4 birds lost, 11 crew members dead. Myra had been the only pilot to make it back, flying on one engine and fumes, her wingman's last words still crackling in her headset. The inquiry cleared her of any wrongdoing, but she'd requested immediate leave and never returned. Until now. Han pocketed his phone and walked toward the operations center, where a wall-mounted map displayed every active mission in theater. Somewhere out there, in the dust and heat and infinite sky, Revenant was hunting. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft. It was a flying gun wrapped in titanium and spite, designed to loiter low and slow over battlefields, shredding armor with a 30mm Gatling cannon that sounded like the sky tearing in half. Myra Castor loved it the way some people loved old dogs, loyal, ugly, and meaner than it looked. She sat in the cockpit now, parked in a dry riverbed 20 miles south of the nearest coalition outpost, canopy open to the cooling night air. Her helmet rested on her knee. Her flight suit was stained with dust and sweat. The HUD was dark. The radio's silent. She'd pulled the transponder fuse hours ago, a trick she'd learned from a guard pilot in Germany who flew search and rescue missions off the grid. Without it, she was invisible to friendly tracking systems. A ghost. The problem with being a ghost, though, was that eventually someone noticed the empty chair. Myra closed her eyes and listened to the wind move across the desert. She thought about Sergeant Oyo, her crew chief, who used to joke that she flew like she had a personal grudge against gravity. She thought about Captain Idris, her wingman, who'd called her Rev because she brought things back from the dead, bad missions, lost causes, pilots who thought they were done. Idris was gone now. So was Oyo. So were 9 others. The official report blamed equipment failure and poor intelligence. Myra blamed herself for not seeing the trap until it was too late. She opened her eyes and looked at the horizon, where the last light bled out of the sky. Somewhere out there, the people responsible were still moving, still planning, still killing, and she intended to find every last one of them. Morning came fast and merciless. Myra was airborne before the sun crested the mountains, flying nap of the earth through a canyon system that didn't appear on any map her squadron had ever used. The A-10 hugged the terrain, wings level, turbofans humming low and steady. She kept her speed just above stall, her altitude below radar coverage. This was the kind of flying that got you killed if you blinked. She didn't blink. The target was a supply depot hidden in a cave network, flagged weeks ago by intelligence but deemed too risky for a sanctioned strike. Too many civilians nearby, too much political blowback if things went wrong. Myra didn't care about politics. She cared about the munitions stockpiled inside, the same model of missiles that had torn her squadron apart. She toggled the targeting pod and watched the infrared feed paint the entrance in shades of white and gray. 2 trucks parked outside. No guards visible. Either they were inside or they weren't expecting company. She armed the Mavericks, double-checked her escape route, and rolled in. The first missile left the rail with a low thump, tracking straight into the cave mouth. The second followed 3 seconds later, punching through the roof of the nearest truck. The explosions came almost simultaneously, a double crack that echoed off the canyon walls. Myra pulled hard right, climbing fast, eyes scanning for threats. Nothing. No SAM launch. No AAA, just fire and smoke pouring from the cave like a dying breath. She leveled off at 2,000 feet and banked south, throttle wide open. By the time anyone arrived to investigate, she'd be long gone. Major Ellison got the call while he was shaving. The voice on the other end belonged to a Colonel Tan, stationed at CENTCOM headquarters, and she did not sound pleased. "We've got another one," Tan said. "Supply depot in the Coast Province. Someone hit it 40 minutes ago. Same profile, same lack of authorization." Ellison wiped the foam from his face and stared at his reflection in the mirror. "Any casualties?" "Just materiel. But that's not the point, Major." Whoever this is, they're operating outside the chain of command. That's not heroics, that's mutiny. Ellison said nothing. Tan continued. I want a name, I want a squadron, and I want them grounded before they start a diplomatic incident. Yes, ma'am. The line went dead. Ellison set the phone down and finished shaving in silence. He knew the name Tan wanted. He'd known it since the first report crossed his desk. The question wasn't who, it was why. And more importantly, whether he was willing to stop her. He thought about the convoy, about the 16 vehicles that would have rolled into a populated area if someone hadn't intervened. He thought about the supply depot, about the missiles that wouldn't be fired at coalition aircraft now. Then he thought about the rule book, about the chain of command, about what happened to officers who looked the other way. He dried his face, put on his uniform, and walked to the operations center. Captain Hahn was already there, bent over a terminal, eyes locked on a flight pattern analysis. He looked up when Ellison entered. I found her, Hahn said quietly. Ellison closed the door behind him. Where? Hahn pulled up a series of radar contacts, overlaid with satellite imagery and automated flight tracking data. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Gaps in coverage, brief windows where an aircraft could slip through undetected if the pilot knew exactly when to move. Myra Castor knew. She's using terrain masking and timing her flights to coincide with shift changes in our surveillance rotation, Hahn explained. She's also avoiding coalition frequencies entirely. No comms, no transponder. If I hadn't been looking for someone flying pre-2010 tactics, I'd have missed it. Ellison studied the screen. You're sure it's her? Hahn nodded. I pulled maintenance records from her last duty station. She logged more hours in the Warthog than anyone in her class. She also wrote a manual on low-altitude penetration techniques that's still used in advanced training. If anyone could pull this off, it's her. Where is she now? Hahn zoomed the map out, highlighting a narrow corridor between two mountain ranges. Based on fuel consumption and her last known strike location, she's probably staged somewhere in this region. Remote, minimal infrastructure, enough space to land and take off without being seen. Ellison leaned against the desk, arms crossed. How long has she been doing this? 8 months, give or take, maybe longer. Some of the older reports might be hers too, but the data's inconclusive. 8 months, Ellison repeated softly, and nobody noticed. Hahn met his gaze. People noticed, sir, they just didn't want to ask questions. The silence between them was heavy. Finally, Ellison straightened. Get me a location, I want to talk to her. And if she won't come in, Ellison hesitated. Then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Myra landed on a stretch of hardpan 40 miles from the nearest road, a place so desolate even the goats avoided it. She shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit, listening to the turbines spool down, the metal ticking as it cooled. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. But inside she felt the familiar weight pressing down, the one that never quite left no matter how many missions she flew. She climbed out, boots hitting the dirt, and walked a slow circle around the aircraft. The gun barrel was scorched black. One of the Maverick rails was empty. Scratches marked the undercarriage where she'd flown too close to the rocks. It wasn't pretty, but it was hers. She'd stolen it 3 weeks into her unauthorized deployment, falsifying a maintenance order and flying it off the base in the middle of the night. By the time anyone realized the bird was missing, she was already 2 countries away. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Eventually, someone would find her. Eventually, the fuel would run out or the luck would run dry. But until then, she had work to do. She pulled a tablet from her survival pack and powered it on, scrolling through intercepted communications she'd been monitoring for weeks. There was chatter about a new convoy forming up near the border, same operational signature as the one she'd hit days ago, same smuggling network, same people. Myra saved the coordinates and powered the tablet down. Tomorrow, she'd fly again. Captain Hahn found her 3 days later. He didn't come with MPs or a strike team. He came alone in a dusty Humvee that rattled over the hardpan like a tin can full of bolts. Myra saw him from a mile away, watched through binoculars as he parked and stepped out unarmed, hands visible. She considered leaving. She also considered staying. In the end, she walked out to meet him, her sidearm holstered but within reach. Hahn stopped 20 feet away. "Revenant," he said. She didn't reply. I'm not here to arrest you, he continued. I'm here to talk. Talk, Myra said flatly. About what? About why you're doing this, about what happens next. Myra crossed her arms. You already know why, Han nodded slowly. I read the report. I know what happened to your squadron. Then you know the people responsible are still out there, still operating, still killing. And you think hunting them down alone is going to change that. I think it's better than sitting in a briefing room waiting for permission. Han took a step closer. You're one of the best pilots I've ever seen, Castor, but you can't win a war by yourself. I'm not trying to win a war, Myra said quietly. I'm trying to finish one. The wind moved between them, kicking up dust. Han studied her face, the lines around her eyes, the exhaustion she wore like a second skin. Come back, he said. Turn yourself in. We'll figure this out. Myra shook her head. I'm not done yet. Then let me help you. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing his words, his intent. Finally, she spoke. You can't help me, but you can stay out of my way. She turned and walked back toward the A-10. Han watched her go, knowing he'd just made a choice he couldn't take back. Major Ellison received Han's report in silence. They were alone in a secure room, the walls bare except for a map of the region and a whiteboard covered in operational notes. Han stood at ease, waiting. You let her go, Ellison said finally. Yes, sir. Why? Han chose his words carefully. Because she's doing what we can't. She's hitting targets we've been sitting on for months, and she's doing it without putting anyone else at risk. Ellison leaned back in his chair. She's also violating about a dozen regulations and operating outside the chain of command. If this blows back, it's on both of us. I understand, sir. Do you? Ellison's voice was quiet but firm. Because if she gets shot down, if she kills the wrong person, if this turns into an international incident, none of that understanding is going to matter. Han met his gaze. With respect, sir, she's not going to stop. Whether we support her or not, she's going to keep flying until she finishes what she started. The question is whether we help her do it right or let her crash and burn on her own. Ellison rubbed his face, the weight of command pressing down. He thought about his own career, about the rules he'd followed, the orders he'd given. He thought about the 16 burning vehicles and the supply depot full of missiles. He thought about a pilot who'd lost everything and decided to keep fighting anyway. What do you suggest? He asked. Han pulled a folder from his bag and set it on the desk. I've been tracking her targets. They're all connected, same network, same supply chain. If we feed her intelligence quietly off the books, she can dismantle the entire operation in less than a month. Ellison opened the folder and scanned the contents. This is insane. Yes, sir. If anyone finds out, they won't. Ellison looked up. You're putting a lot of faith in someone who's already gone rogue. I'm putting faith in someone who's never missed, Han replied. Ellison closed the folder. If this goes sideways, we're both finished. Understood. Ellison picked up a pen and signed the inside cover. Then let's make sure it doesn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Myra flew 9 missions. Each one was faster, tighter, more precise than the last. The targets came through in encrypted bursts on a frequency she'd never used before, coordinates and intel packages that appeared in her tablet like clockwork. She didn't know who was sending them. She didn't ask. She just flew. The first target was a fuel depot disguised as a civilian warehouse. The second, a weapons cache buried beneath a schoolyard that hadn't seen children in years. The third, a command post operating out of a defunct radio tower. Every strike was surgical, every escape clean. The enemy started to notice. Chatter increased on their networks, patrols doubled. They knew someone was hunting them, but they didn't know who. They couldn't see her coming. By the time they heard the Warthog's engines, it was already too late. Myra didn't celebrate. She didn't feel victorious. She felt lighter, like a weight she'd been carrying was slowly lifting. Not gone, just manageable. One night after a mission that left her too wired to sleep, she sat under the stars and thought about Idris. About the last thing he'd said before the missile hit. Rev, you got my 6, right? She'd had his 6. She'd had all of them, but it hadn't been enough. Now it had to be. Breakthrough came on the 15th day. Han received a decrypted communication from an asset embedded deep in the smuggling network. A meeting was scheduled, high-value targets, including the men who'd orchestrated the ambush that killed Myra's squadron. Location, time, security detail, everything was there. Han stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. This was it, the end game. He encrypted the data and sent it to Myra's device, then added a single line of text. "This is the one, make it count." Myra received the message at dawn. She read it twice, memorizing every detail, then deleted it. She prepped the A-10 with the care of someone who knew this might be the last time. Full ordnance load, extra fuel, every system checked and double-checked. The flight to the target took 90 minutes, most of it low and fast through a valley system that twisted like a snake. She came in from the west, the sun at her back, her shadow racing across the rocks below. The compound appeared exactly as the intel described. 3 buildings, high walls, vehicles clustered near the main gate. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures inside, at least a dozen bodies, maybe more. Myra armed the weapons and began her approach. This time, she wasn't just hunting. She was closing a chapter. The first bomb hit the main building dead center. The second took out the vehicle depot. She circled back, gun hot, and strafed the perimeter, the 30mm rounds chewing through concrete and steel like paper. When the smoke cleared, nothing moved. Myra climbed to altitude and turned for home, her hands steady, her heart finally quiet. Major Ellison stood in the operations center when the satellite imagery came through. The compound was gone, completely leveled. He stared at the screen, then at Han, who stood beside him with his arms crossed. "She did it," Ellison said quietly. Han nodded. "She did." "Now what?" "Now," Han said, "we bring her in, the right way." Ellison picked up the phone and made the call. 2 hours later, Myra received a message on the same encrypted frequency. "Mission complete, RTB. No charges." "You have my word, Ellison." She read it 3 times, looking for the trap, the catch, the lie, but the words were simple, direct. She powered down the tablet and looked at the sky, the endless blue that had been her home for so long. She was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix, but she'd done what she came to do. She'd finished it. Myra climbed into the cockpit one last time and fired up the engines. The flight back to Kandahar was smooth, uneventful. She flew with her transponder on, her call sign active, her position visible to every radar in the region. When she touched down, there were no MPs waiting, no handcuffs, just Major Ellison and Captain Han standing on the tarmac in the afternoon sun. Myra shut down the engines and climbed out. She walked toward them slowly, her helmet under her arm, her face unreadable. Ellison extended his hand. "Welcome back, Revenant." Myra looked at his hand, then at his face. Finally, she shook it. "Thanks," she said quietly. Han smiled. "Hell of a way to get a recall, Castor." She almost smiled, almost. "Couldn't let you have all the fun." Ellison gestured toward the operations center. "Let's debrief. Then we'll figure out what comes next." Myra nodded and followed them inside, leaving the A-10 behind, its wings scarred and its guns empty. It had brought her home. That was enough. The debriefing lasted 3 hours. Myra answered every question, held nothing back. She explained the missions, the targets, the tactics. She showed them her notes, her intercepted communications, the intel she'd gathered over 8 months of flying alone. Ellison and Han listened without interruption. When she finished, the room fell silent. Finally, Ellison leaned forward. "You know we should court-martial you." "I know," Myra said. "But we're not going to." She looked up, surprised. "Why not?" "Because," Ellison said, "you did what needed to be done. And because the people you went after are the same ones who have been bleeding us dry for months. You saved lives, Castor, a lot of them." Han added, "The brass doesn't know the details. As far as they're concerned, you were on an extended training assignment. We're going to keep it that way." Myra stared at them, processing. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Ellison said. "But you're grounded, officially. You need rest. You need time. And you need to decide if you still want to be a pilot or if you want to do something else." Myra didn't answer right away. She thought about the cockpit, the missions, the weight she'd carried. "I don't know," she said finally. "Take your time," Ellison replied. "You've earned it." They stood, shook hands again, and Myra left the room. Outside, the base was alive with activity. Helicopters landing, convoys rolling out, the constant hum of a war that never stopped. She walked to the edge of the tarmac and looked at the sky. Somewhere up there, other pilots were flying, other missions were unfolding. She didn't envy them, not anymore. She was done. 6 months later, Myra Castor stood in a classroom at Nellie's Air Force Base, addressing a group of young pilots fresh out of flight school. They looked at her with a mix of awe and nervousness, the way students always looked at instructors who'd seen real combat. She didn't tell them about the unauthorized missions. She didn't talk about the 8 months she spent hunting ghosts in the desert. But she told them about flying low, about trusting their instincts, about the responsibility that came with sitting in the cockpit of a machine built to kill. "You're going to make mistakes," she said. "You're going to lose people. You're going to question every decision you've ever made." She paused, looking at their faces. "But you keep flying, because someone has to, and because the people on the ground are counting on you to bring them home." The class ended and the students filed out, chattering among themselves. One of them, a young woman with sharp eyes and a confident stride, lingered by the door. "Ma'am," she said, "is it true you flew solo missions in Afghanistan?" Myra met her gaze. "Where'd you hear that?" "Rumor, but people say you're the reason half the smuggling networks in Coast Province collapsed." Myra smiled faintly. "People say a lot of things." The student nodded, unconvinced. "Well, whoever did it, they're a legend." Myra thought about that word. Legend. It felt too big, too clean. She wasn't a legend. She was just someone who couldn't let go. "Get to your next class," Myra said. "Yes, ma'am." The student saluted and left. Myra stood alone in the empty room, the afternoon light streaming through the windows. She thought about the A-10, about the missions, about the people she'd lost and the ones she'd saved. She thought about Idris, about his voice on the radio, about the way he used to call her Rev. She wasn't Revenant anymore. Not officially. But the name stuck, whispered in ready rooms and briefing halls, passed down like a ghost story. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the legacy she'd leave behind. Myra picked up her notes and walked out into the Nevada sun. Somewhere, a jet screamed overhead, climbing toward the endless sky. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She'd already been there. She'd already flown higher and lower than most people ever would. Now she was teaching others to do the same. And that, she thought, was worth something. That was worth everything.